Is this a player that is knocking on the door of superstardom?
I do think Chris Olave is a guy that I want to believe that there's another ceiling able to be accessed for him.
I wouldn't be surprised, but would you be surprised to see a big third-year breakout from Rashid Shaheed?
No, I mean,
look at the release.
There's your separation.
Great route.
Stutter and go. Gets by clean.
That is unbelievable.
May be the greatest catch I've ever seen.
I want to start there in New Orleans because this is a wide receiver unit that I'm really interested in, Matt. I think this unit overall can outkick and outperform expectations, and certainly the crown jewel of that starting trio there, I think, is Chris Olave, right? So 87 receptions on 138 targets last year, 1123 receiving, 5 touchdowns, a 63% catch percentage. Is this a player that is knocking on the door of superstardom? I mean, we're talking about a guy who's going into his third year, almost an entirely green route tree, and he's just rock solid everywhere.
Yeah, man, it's interesting. You know, I've mentioned this on the show before that I did a top 15, wide receivers 25 and under for Yahoo recently. And, Chris Olave was one I really struggled with. Honestly, and of course, they posted the graphic online, and obviously I was like, if people don't want to read the article, but they want to argue with me, this is the place to go. And people did, and it was fun. But anyways, the biggest thing for me is honestly, wide receivers 7 to, I would say the 7 to 11 on that list was really just toss up, and I ended up actually having Olave as the 11th player on there, and now a week or so after filing it, I already kind of regret it. I want to have him higher, but that's just because that's how close these guys are. Like in the moment, I felt Drake London was better than Chris Olave, but here a week later I'm thinking maybe I don't even really think that, right? Like Devonta Smith maybe is just better than Drake London, and I had hit him after. So it's just, that's how close that group really is. But I think with Chris Olave specifically, one thing that's super interesting about his RP profile, you mentioned the all green route tree. We know he's one of the best separators that came into the NFL via reception perception prospect charting. Right. He has been that guy in the NFL. His profile's really similar year 1 to year 2. In year 1, 75.8% success rate versus man. In year 2, 76.3%. Super close. Year 2 to year 1 success rate versus zone coverage number 81.5, 81.2. Press coverage 77.5. Year 2, 77.1. Like, that's so close. Now, right. I think our question there, James, is this a guy that is going to just stick in this range and be kind of like is he a Terry McLaurin, Tyler Lockett type? Or is this is there going to be a year 3 jump, right? Like a Nico Collins type of year 3 jump where he goes into like a new stratosphere. I think that's our biggest question with Chris Olave. Like, is there more to get out of his game? I think the biggest thing that we'd like to see with Olave is we'd like to see him run a much more diverse route tree than he has in his first 2 seasons. They got a little bit less vertically inclined in year 2 than in year 1, but still could use a lot more slants and more layup routes going forward with Chris Olave, which I'm hoping that this new coaching staff does.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at what he has been able to do, and the quarterback situation too has been, it's been up and down. People thought that, and a lot of people thought that the quarterback situation was going to be resolved last year with Derek Carr, and Carr, his skill set didn't necessarily match up very well with the offense that they laid down on the table for him and the skill set that Chris Olave has. So, and I tell you, if you looked at Derek Klassen's work and you cross-examine that with your work in regards to Derek Carr and Chris Olave, that should have screamed out like this might not be a match. And I feel like, I think you and I both kind of sort of ignored those warning signs to a degree and said, but this could work out. Maybe something will change. And ultimately not a whole lot changed. Derek Carr was who he was, and I thought we had a little bit of oil and water situation there in New Orleans.
If we adjust Olave's route tree and we add in some of these layers like play action, like, pre-snap motion at the snap, like I think there will be more answers available for Derek Carr. But also there is a level of like the other players have to step up too, which is what we'll discuss here. But yeah, man, I do think Chris Olave is a guy that I want to believe that there's another ceiling able to be accessed for him. Because we've seen him be a very, very good player in the NFL, but I do think there is a great player in there too. So he could be, if you're looking for more of that like high end comp, is he Terry McLaurin or is he Stephon Diggs? I think he could be a Diggs type if we see a year 3 jump from Chris Olave. Because like I look back at Diggs's early careers, the first 2 years very good. It was in year 3 in 2017 when he had a 78.7% success rate versus man, and that was when he led the NFL in success rate versus man coverage in 2017. Obviously, the big statistical seasons came then when he was in Buffalo, when he was with Josh Allen. Of course, we know that story, but him being at that above 90th percentile success rate versus man coverage number. And then again, leading the NFL in 2017 in success rate versus man, that was like the indicator that there was another step there for him to be reached. I do want to see that from Olave in year 3, and that Diggs comparison makes me think like, okay, perhaps that's possible.
Yeah, you take a look at his numbers from last year, right? 76% success rate versus man, 81.5% success rate versus zone. That 75-80 split, man zone, that's generally what we see from the top receivers in the game, right? And again, keep in mind too, the route tree that he's being asked to run here. I think he had again, there's not a lot of layups, as you mentioned, and he is asked to run some more difficult, deeper routes. So I do wonder if those numbers can move up here. And by the way, still a super young player, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to year number 3. I wouldn't be surprised if he does take a step forward. But you mentioned some of the supporting cast there, Matt. Rashid Shaheed, man, I've loved this guy since the jump. He just goes out there and makes big plays. And certainly that is what we saw last year. On 75 targets, this guy had 719 yards. On 46 catches, he had 5 touchdowns. This guy just makes plays. He is a third-year player. I'll just ask you, I wouldn't be surprised, but would you be surprised to see a big third-year breakout from Rashid Shaheed?
No, I mean, again, we talk about the changes in this offense's structure. I think it really suits Shaheed. I think he's a guy that could really take another step as a player. I mean, the fact that he's a guy who I do think functions well from the slot. I think he plays well inside, but he still has a 74th percentile success rate versus press, 74.5%.
Wow.
That's
impressive.
good. And he faced press coverage on 18.5% of his routes. And I think you see real deal routes from him on film where he goes against press on the outside and stacks defensive backs. I mean, obviously he has the speed, but he does have the moves off the line of scrimmage that you want to see. And if you look at his route percentage chart, he's been getting the Zoolander jokes on Twitter because all of his in-breaking routes are green, all of his out-breaking routes are red. Let's remember, people, that wide receivers line up on both sides of the field, so there are definitely times when he's running in-breaking routes to his left. Rashid Shaheed can turn left. Okay, so I do think that is we just got to say that. Let's remember how the route tree actually works. But it is an objectively funny joke. But it's just a funny tree. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen something like that where literally every in-breaking route is green, literally every out-breaking route is red / below average. Matt, even the flat route, bro. I know.
Come on, dog.
I know. Yeah. Usually there are guys sometimes where because the corner and out route have some of the lower average success rate. For a variety of reasons. Sometimes you'll see even great receivers. Like I always remember about like Allen Robinson's trees. He was like this in-breaking route king, but those deep out-breaking routes were not like necessarily his specialty. Even some like really great receivers, like not the post 2018 version of Devontae Adams, but like Devontae Adams had that in some of like the 17 and I guess maybe the 18 season too. But I just always thought that was fascinating about some of these receivers. But yeah, then usually still they'll get the comeback route is high or the flat route. But yeah, so for him to be completely all in breaking routes. But I do think that's indicative of his game though, man, because I think he runs routes, especially against ISO man coverage. or even some like pattern match coverages where he runs those routes well over the middle of the field. Post routes and dig routes and stuff like that. The 80% success rate on posts, especially while running them at a 15% clip.
So impressive.
Super impressive, especially in conjunction with the 9 route success rate, which I don't think people would be surprised is high. But I do think like when he's working on those outbreaking routes, especially against zone coverage, I want to see him kind of play a little bit faster there. Maybe just have more confidence in working through zone coverage, because his zone coverage success rate is low and his outbreaking route success rate is low, as we're joking about here. And I do think those two things kind of go together.
Yeah, you talk about the zone percentage there. 76% success rate versus zone, clocked in as the 32nd percentile. So that's obviously needs some work. But I'll ask you this, though. How much of that score is influenced by the fact that he ran nearly 40% of all of his routes were the 9 post corner, right?
Totally.
And
yeah.
It's those routes right there. It's like, okay, I mean, good luck trying to beat zone on those routes, right? So, he could improve certainly, but you got to think that his zone scores are influenced heavily, I think, by his usage, which again, nearly 40% of his routes were on the 9 post corner. Good night.
Yeah, like I think if he remains 69% success rate versus man and he gets that zone coverage score to, 78, 79%, I know that doesn't sound like a big jump, but I don't know. The zone coverage metrics are really funny because, again, you said the 76% score, 76.4% is the 32nd percentile. Even if he just gets up to, let's call it 78.8%, that's the 51st percentile, just because
right.
like that's a pretty significant jump, just where those marks are and just how many receivers in that big clump of like zone beaters there. That's where most of those guys end up falling. So it's like, it's not that big of a difference, but it is a pretty significant difference if he goes from bottom third of the league or whatever type of zone coverage beater to around middle of the pack. I think then we're talking about a guy that you can throw 100 targets to in a season, maybe even like 110, 120 type of targets in a season, because he can beat you in very specific ways. Like, I just think that he's more of a complete route runner than he's probably given credit for. Not quite like on the John Brown axis of receivers, but a little bit like that. This is a weird comparison, but I can't, because this player came into the league after Rashid Shaheed. But I feel like what people wanted Marvin Mims to be is kind of like what Rashid Shaheed actually is, in that he is a speed threat, a vertical guy who's a kick returner, but he also runs real deal legitimate routes. So yeah, 80% success rate on curls, 79.4% success rate on slants. Those were the 2 routes he ran under the NFL average. If we get more of those base routes in his tree, I do think that that's going to be pretty significant development for Shaheed.